Chapter 2. The Six Occupations. A lay follower must not engage in. There are 6 evil occupations. In the Agamas and the Nikayas, the Buddha forbade lay followers from engaging in the 6 evil occupations, because these 6 occupations are not in harmony with the compassionate heart of Buddhism. These 6 evil occupations are as follows. 1. Do not engage in hunting. Hunting is an extremely evil occupation, killing countless forest animals, deer, stags, monkeys, weasels, wild boars, jungle fowls, and various other kinds of birds, and so on. 2. Do not engage in fishing. Fishing is also a very cruel occupation, specializing in catching shrimp and fish, killing aquatic species using fish pots, traps, casting nets, fishing nets, lift nets, fishing rods, and so on. 3. Do not trade in raw meat. Trading in raw meat is the occupation of slaughtering water buffaloes, cows, pigs, goats, horses, dogs, chickens, ducks, and so on. People who do this work are butchers, killing cattle to sell meat by the kilogram for others to buy as food. This occupation is very cruel, killing living beings without the slightest compassion. 4. Do not trade in cooked meat. Trading in cooked meat is the occupation of taking the meat of living beings and cooking it into food such as noodle soup, pork organ porridge, rice noodle soup, thick noodle soup, shredded pork, pork rolls, fermented pork rolls, and so on. This is also an evil occupation. People practicing this occupation also lose their compassion. 5. Do not produce and trade in alcohol. Because producing and trading in alcohol makes people addicted and drunk, losing intelligence, so they may shout abuse throughout the neighborhood and the village, curse their wives and scold their children, disregard parents and siblings, ignore basic hygiene, lie on the streets, sleep in the bushes, lie exposed to dew and sun, discredit human dignity, and make the body vulnerable to illness, creating suffering for fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters, wives, children, and so on. 6. Do not trade in human beings. Trading in human beings is the slave trade, and prostitution is also trading in human beings. This occupation is very evil, using power, money, and material goods to force defenseless and poverty-stricken people to sell their bodies as slaves or as prostitutes, causing families to suffer and be torn apart. Prostitution is a depraved occupation, destroying the dignity of human beings, stripping human beings of morality, and making them worse than animals. Because animals have times for mating and times when they do not mate. Therefore, those practicing selling their bodies to feed their mouths degrade the human condition. These 6 occupations are evil occupations, killing living beings and causing suffering and illness to countless people. Particularly, producing and selling alcohol, opium, heroin, cigarettes, rustic tobacco, and so on, are things causing disease, addiction, and depleting the money, wealth, and property of so many people, leaving painful consequences that many generations must bear. Therefore, those who engage in these occupations to sustain their own bodies, their parents, and their families, and to make themselves rich on the suffering of countless people and animals, are ignorant people, not seeing the law of cause and effect, controlling the events of every second within each human being. The law of cause and effect will not spare anyone. Whoever does evil must reap the painful consequences. If you do not believe the Buddhist teachings, ask about the families who live by these occupations. Outwardly, they may appear wealthy and comfortable, but inwardly, they have no true happiness. Usually, these families frequently have ailing and sick members, one after another. Accidents frequently happen, making the family restless, always anxious and fearful, and their family life is never harmonious, peaceful, or happy. When you do evil, you must reap painful consequences. There is no escape, and no one can save you from that suffering. Because the Buddha knew the cause and effect of wholesome and unwholesome deeds very well, he wanted his disciples to escape suffering. Thus, he frequently forbade lay followers from engaging in the 6 evil occupations. Even if those occupations make earning money very easy, they do not bring true happiness. Therefore, he wanted his disciples to live with true peace and happiness, no longer encountering suffering. It is precisely because in our daily lives we create many unwholesome causes that we must endure painful results for many lifetimes. No one brings those painful results to us, not even an evil demon, just as no deity, Buddha, or Bodhisattva can bestow blessings upon us. Please pay close attention to this point. Cause and effect is a fair law. What we do, we must bear, and no one else can bear it for us. Therefore, no one causes suffering to us but ourselves, just as no one brings us peace and happiness but ourselves. Because lay followers do not see how profoundly fair and just the law of cause and effect is, in life, they do not know how to choose an occupation, only seeing which work makes money and provides food and clothing easily. Especially in environments where everyone practicing killing makes earning money easy, they imitate others, unexpectedly creating countless grave sins. From actions creating death and suffering for living beings, they themselves and even their families must receive those painful consequences, from one person to another. As disciples of the Buddha, lay followers must pay attention to these 6 evil occupations, always obeying the Buddha's teachings to find true happiness and peace for themselves and their entire families. Engaging in an occupation in this right way is called right action. Only a righteous occupation can nourish your right livelihood and that of everyone in the family. From then on, happiness will come to you. Do you believe these teachings? Consuming animal food, unseen, unheard, and unsuspected. We have added notes to the 6 evil occupations taught in this book, so that Venerables and Buddhist followers may see clearly. Why do Theravada monks consume animal food? Did the Buddha permit monks to consume animal food? To answer these questions and clarify Buddhism, on what teaching of the Buddha do Theravada monks rely when they dare to consume animal meat? Dear Venerables, monks, teachers, and Buddhist followers, please reread Sutta 55, the Jivaka Sutta, page 71, in the Majjhima Nikaya, Volume 2 of the Vietnamese Buddhist canon, translated from Pali to Vietnamese by Venerable Minh Cho. In this discourse, in the first passage, the Buddha taught monastics not to consume animal meat seen, heard, and suspected. Jivaka. I say that in 3 instances, animal meat must not be consumed: seen, heard, and suspected. According to the meaning of this passage, when a bhikkhu sees that the food offered by a Buddhist follower contains the meat of a living being, he must not eat it. That is the first instance. When the food offered by a Buddhist follower is not seen to contain the meat of a living being, but he hears others say it contains meat, he must not eat it. That is the second instance. When the food offered by a Buddhist follower is not seen to contain meat, and also he has not heard that it contains meat, but the mind gives rise to suspicion that it contains the meat of a living being because of a fishy smell. He must not eat it. That is the third instance. Looking at these three instances, clearly the Buddha did not prohibit eating the meat of living beings, but only gave advice so the bhikkhus would be aware of the suffering of living beings and thus not eat meat. Being aware of the suffering of living beings and not eating meat means practicing compassion for living beings, meaning living true to the ethics of respecting life. To prohibit means a dogmatic precept. A dogmatic precept involves forceful compulsion to not eat the meat of living beings, meaning eating vegetarian food. But that vegetarianism is vegetarianism in the style of Mahayana Brahmanism, vegetarianism due to dogmatic precepts. Conversely, original Buddhism relies on precepts of virtue, not prohibition. It does not prohibit, but only advises monastics to voluntarily eat in such a way as to embody the path of compassion in the true sense of a compassionate mind. The first and second instances are very clear, while the third instance, suspicion, seems vague. But in reality, the meat of living beings has a fishy and foul smell. Although we do not see or hear, how could fish not smell like fish? Beef not smell like cow, pork not smell like pig, or chicken not smell like chicken. All animal meat has its distinct smell. How could we not suspect? And once suspected, he must not eat it, because our conscience and compassion do not allow sustaining life on the suffering of other creatures. The Buddha taught a second time. Jivaka, I say that in three instances meat may be consumed: unseen, unheard, and unsuspected. Perhaps relying on this teaching, Theravada monks use arguments to justify their evil actions. Unseen means not seeing people kill the animal to offer to oneself. Unheard means not hearing the cries of the animal when being killed to offer to oneself. Unsuspected means seeing animal food offered by Buddhist followers without suspecting people killed the animal to make food to offer to oneself. Therefore, in the Jivaka Sutta, there are words in parentheses, slaughtered specifically for oneself. These 4 words were added by later generations to satisfy the sensual desire to eat the meat of living beings. In the past, the patriarchs dared to do anything. They added and omitted heavily in original scriptures. The same is true today. They still dare to use arguments to distort the Buddhist teachings, sometimes to protect their reputation while breaking the precepts, and sometimes due to not understanding the method or not yet attaining realization in practice. If the discourse ended here, bringing clarity to Buddhism would be difficult. However, the discourse continues with a second and third part, so we clearly see the unwholesome face and the craving of Theravada monks, who cleverly add details and cleverly argue to distort the Buddha's scriptures to commit heinous crimes. Consequently, in all Theravada Buddhist countries, practice goes nowhere. Falling into a deranged vipassana concentration, they practice not in accordance with the 4 foundations of mindfulness and the 4 holy jhanas of Buddhism. They chop the method of the 4 foundations of mindfulness into fragments. This is a meditation center for mindfulness of the mind. This is a meditation center for mindfulness of the body. This is a meditation center for mindfulness of feelings. Chopping the 4 foundations of mindfulness into fragments like that, and loudly promoting it, writing books to popularize it everywhere, causes later generations to misunderstand the Buddha's Dhamma, practice incorrectly, and fail to resolve birth, aging, sickness, and death. Yet the method of the 4 foundations of mindfulness is wonderful. Practicing it brings results immediately, and cultivating it yields extraordinary spiritual powers beyond imagination. Because they divide this method, Theravada monks accomplish nothing. They merely wander around in imaginal concentrations, never attaining the liberation of Buddhism. Countries following Theravada Buddhism adopt Buddhism as the state religion. All young men of the appropriate age must enter the temple to practice for 3 years. If they wish to continue, they stay. If not, they disrobe and return to lay life to marry. Yet these young men, despite having practiced Buddhism, have no compassion at all. They dared to take up knives, guns, and weapons to slaughter their own people, just as they kill pigs, chickens, or goats, and massacre tens of thousands of Vietnamese compatriots residing in Cambodia. That is proof that Cambodia adopted Buddhism as its state religion, and yet its people still killed others like evil demons, leaving the whole world horrified and condemning the crimes of that country. Since practicing while still eating the meat of living beings turns one into an evil demon, how could one ever become a Buddha? The Buddha taught exactly this in the Jivaka Sutta. Yet the Theravada patriarchs still dared to fabricate eating the 5 kinds of impure meat. It is truly heartbreaking. Why is that? Because Theravada Buddhist monastics eat the meat of living beings, their minds become very fierce. Their monastic life contradicts the ethics of not causing suffering, to oneself, to others, and to all living beings of Buddhism. Buddhism is the ethics of humanity. How could the ethics of humanity allow one to harden the heart and eat the meat of living beings without the slightest love? So then, are such monastics truly monastics of Buddhism, or not? Please answer this yourselves. Also, in that same discourse, the Buddha continued to teach the bhikkhus not to eat the meat of living beings by practicing and cultivating the 4 immeasurable minds. The sutta continues. Jivaka, a bhikkhu dwelling in dependence on a certain village or town. He must always cultivate his mind to pervade one direction with loving kindness and abide there. Likewise the second, the third, and the fourth. Above, below, across, everywhere, endlessly, he pervades with a vast, boundless mind of loving kindness, free from hostility, free from ill will, and abides there. According to the meaning of this passage, when a bhikkhu eats, he must examine the food before him thoroughly, while at the same time arousing compassion and pity for all living beings. If he sees that it contains the meat of living beings, he would rather die than eat it. That is to practice the path of compassion and the ethics of respecting life. The teaching is this clear, yet Theravada monks still harden their hearts enough to eat meat. We truly feel sorry for them, because a whole life of practice brings no benefit to themselves or to any living being. This passage makes it perfectly clear that a practitioner of Buddhism must always cultivate the 4 immeasurable minds. For a person who has cultivated the 4 immeasurable minds, how could they still have the heart to eat the meat of living beings? Is that not so? Yet Theravada monks can still swallow the meat of living beings, which is astonishing indeed. Regarding the bhikkhus, the Buddha taught them not to eat the meat of living beings through 2 wonderful teachings. 1. Eat only what is unseen, unheard, and unsuspected. 2. Eat with a compassionate mind pervading all 10 directions, above and below. In that same sutta, the Buddha also taught lay followers how to offer food to the Buddha and the Holy Sangha. Jivaka, whoever kills a living being for the Tathagata or for his disciples accumulates much demerit due to 5 causes. When he says, "Go and bring that animal here," that is the first cause by which he accumulates much demerit. When the animal is led away and dragged by the neck, experiencing pain and distress. That is the second cause. When he says, "Go and kill this animal," that is the third cause. When the animal is killed and undergoes extreme pain and distress, that is the fourth cause. When he offers to the Tathagata or his disciples in an improper way, that is the fifth cause, by which he accumulates much demerit. From this passage, we can clearly see that the Buddha carefully taught lay followers not to offer animal food to the Buddha and the Holy Sangha. To make such an offering is improper. It brings no blessing, but instead harms virtue, and adds a grave offense through killing living beings. The Javaka Sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya is a highly valuable discourse for Theravada monastics. It affirms that Buddhist monastics must not eat the meat of living beings. They should eat plant-based food for the purpose of cultivating loving-kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity, abandoning sensual desire and abandoning unwholesome states, purifying body and mind, entering the various meditative absorptions, and mastering life, death, and rebirth. Conversely, if a monastic still eats the meat of living beings, that means desire has not yet been abandoned, and unwholesome states have not yet been left behind. Such a life of Buddhist practice is a tragic waste. One gains none of the liberation of Buddhism and instead falls into hell. Hell here is not a realm, but rather a state of suffering of the body or distress of the mind. If one still has such an evil mind while practicing, one remains indebted to donors for countless lifetimes. Nowadays, Theravada monks eat for sensual pleasure and grow fat, using unwholesome states to nourish the body. Therefore, this body must suffer endlessly, because once you have brought into your body the suffering of living beings, how could you possibly escape suffering? Note: reading the Javaka Sutta, we observe this about Buddhism. Buddhism is a religion of self-reliance, teaching the humanistic ethics of cause and effect in a very practical and concrete way. Therefore, the Buddha was a psychologist who thoroughly understood the feelings, thoughts, and aspirations of everyone. His teaching is entirely about the ethics of being human. And because he taught the ethics of being human, speaking about human psychology is extremely profound. 1. Teaching lay followers not to engage in evil occupations to avoid unwholesome karmic consequences, such as accidents, illness, untimely death, and so on. 2. Teaching monks not to eat the meat of living beings through careful and mindful attention to every bite, with a vast, loving heart toward all living beings. 3. Teaching Buddhist followers not to offer the meat of living beings prepared as food to the Buddha and the Holy Sangha. Such an offering is improper and unmeritorious, bringing no blessing but only adding sins. The Buddha's whole teaching, from the good in the beginning to the good in the end, teaches people how to live within wholesome states, preventing and eradicating unwholesome states. Therefore, from the very first step, the Buddha taught lay followers not to engage in the 6 evil occupations explained above. The method of Buddhist practice is very concrete. Here, monks and Buddhist followers, you must understand clearly. Changing your occupation and no longer engaging in evil occupations is practice. To practice means to correct oneself, to change oneself, to improve oneself, to act wholesomely again, and to stop causing suffering to oneself, to others, and to all living beings. It is not about chanting sutras, reciting the Buddha's name, sitting in meditation, or bowing in repentance to erase sins and enjoy blessings. You must not misunderstand practice according to the guidance of scholarly teachers of certain sects, who say that practice means sitting in meditation, going into retreat, chanting sutras, repenting, reciting the Buddha's name, reciting mantras, transmitting mind seals, shouting, striking, or pushing to awaken Buddha nature. Those are forms of practice influenced by foreign elements of other religions, doing nothing to help us liberate the mind from greed, hatred, delusion, afflictions, love, hate, anger, resentment, jealousy, suspicion, and other unwholesome states. The methods of practice taught in the original Buddhist scriptures are more practical and concrete, producing results immediately as soon as you begin to practice, unlike the methods taught by the scholars mentioned above, who rely on the expanded scriptures of certain sects. As stated above, when you change an evil occupation to a wholesome occupation, you no longer cause suffering to living beings. Not causing suffering to living beings means not causing suffering to yourselves. Not causing suffering to yourselves means liberation. Teaching people not to engage in evil occupations and not to do evil deeds is exactly practicing the wholesome. Do you understand this? Teaching people not to offer food made from the flesh and blood of living beings creates bodily karma that results in less sickness and a longer life. Teaching monks not to eat the meat of living beings is the cultivation of loving kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity to counter greed, hatred, delusion, selfishness, pettiness, and so on. In this discourse, monks and Buddhist followers should pay close attention to the Buddha's teaching. Eating the meat of living beings must be unseen, unheard, and unsuspected. This means that in eating and drinking, one must train the eyes and ears. One must be careful and mindful. When eating and drinking, one must clearly know whether the food contains the flesh and blood and the agonizing death of living beings. If it does, we would rather die within the Buddha's precepts than eat and break them. Why is that? Because a Buddhist monastic constantly cultivates the mind with expansive love for all living beings, for humanity across the 10 directions of the world. If we only seek to nourish this impermanent and impure body, and chase after sensual pleasures and the sweet illusions of taste, then we are not yet an authentic Buddhist monastic possessing compassion. Buddhism practices true vegetarianism, eating vegetarian food out of boundless love for living beings. Conversely, in this world there are people who eat vegetarian food, not eating the meat of living beings, but making vegetarian food that imitates meat. That is worldly vegetarianism. Though they eat vegetarian food, they still crave meat, and so they produce vegetarian foods resembling meat to satisfy that craving. The Buddha does not accept such a method of vegetarianism. Buddhism is authentic practice, doing wholesome deeds. Vegetarian eating arises from genuine goodness of heart, from true compassion for living beings, and therefore one cannot bear to eat the flesh of living beings. To eat vegetarian food merely because you fear hell, fear the ghosts of impermanence or yaksha demons tormenting, burning, stabbing, cutting the tongue, hooking the throat, or pulling out the tendons. To eat vegetarian food in order to seek rebirth in heaven, the ultimate bliss, and so on. To eat vegetarian food in order to pray that disasters pass, illness disappears, and long life be gained. Vegetarianism of that sort is not accepted in Buddhism, because it is not a method of practice leading to liberation. It is only a kind of vegetarianism meant to console the mind. Such vegetarianism is like a cow eating grass, completely meaningless on the path of liberation. Right action and right livelihood. Buddhism is wonderful. It teaches practice as the way to escape the suffering of human life by changing evil occupations so as not to cause suffering to oneself or to others. Then it teaches eating in order to sustain the body with foods that contain no suffering, giving to others, and making offerings to the Sangha with offerings that are not improper, so that one's virtue is not damaged and one's merit may be complete in the present and in the future. 1. In working, avoid evil occupations and evil actions. 2. In eating, be careful and mindful. Do not just eat anywhere or whatever happens to be there. Eat in a proper place, not sitting at stalls or in a roadside tent in the middle of a market. And further, spread compassion and gratitude toward the one who prepared the offering. Refuse to heartlessly eat the meat of living beings, and be full of boundless compassion. 3. Offer to the Sangha from the sweat and tears of your own labor. Being deceitful or stealing is not allowed, and killing living beings is not allowed. When receiving food offerings, a monastic must not only avoid eating the meat of living beings, but must also examine whether his practice and virtue make him worthy to partake of that offering. From a righteous occupation, that is, right action, whether through physical or mental labor, one produces wholesome food to sustain the body rightly, right livelihood, without cruelty or suffering in it. In the Noble Eightfold Path, the Buddha affirmed two paths, two stages of training, concerning the lifestyle of an authentic monastic: right action and right livelihood. These are the two paths of practice to escape the realms of hell, hungry ghosts, and animals. If a person engages in an occupation that kills living beings and causes suffering to others, Buddhism calls that occupation wrong action. Wrong action also means evil actions, speech, and thoughts. The act of killing living beings and causing suffering to others, or insulting others, speaking ill of others, slandering others, exaggerating trivial matters, adding or removing details, etc. These are evil actions. Evil actions constitute wrong action. With wrong action as the cause, the result must be suffering. There is absolutely no escape. Therefore, cause and effect cannot be evaded. Even if hiding in the sky or burrowing under the earth, one cannot escape it. Wrong action also means the karma of suffering. Seeing a person suffering an accident that could lead to imprisonment or a death sentence, that is all due to their evil karma. A sick person groaning and tossing in agony day and night until death, that is also their evil karma, resulting from unwholesome causes they created in the past, and so on. Wrong action also refers to bad habits, such as people addicted to gambling, alcohol, prostitution, promiscuity, thuggery, and so on. Wrong action also encompasses actions of heedlessness, chasing after the sensual pleasures and unwholesome states of the world, causing suffering to oneself, to others, and to living beings, and so on. Wrong action also includes illegal wrongdoings, committed to earn money to support one's life, as well as actions of capturing and killing living beings to trade and sell, to earn money to feed parents, family, spouses, and children. That is, using wrong action to nourish a wrong livelihood, not only for oneself, but for the entire family. Under the Buddha's gaze, taking the evil karma of living beings to sustain the body is bringing into the body an evil karma, a suffering, and a great disaster. Therefore, he taught that those actions are unrighteous actions, wrong actions maintaining a wrong livelihood, nurturing crime, and nurturing suffering for oneself and for others. To avoid creating wrong action, the Buddha forbade his disciples from engaging in the 6 evil occupations: to avoid bringing into the body the suffering caused by the evil karma they themselves created. For the sake of right livelihood, the Buddha further taught not to eat the meat of living beings, because eating the meat of living beings is nourishing a wrong livelihood, bringing diseases and disasters into the body, bringing severe suffering and calamities into life, and bringing instability and unfulfilled desires into the family, and so on. People who offer and donate to the Sangha through cruelty will receive no blessings, but instead demerit, reaping the suffering consequences of hell, the animal realm, and so on. A recipient who accepts such an offering without recognizing the evil behind the donor's offering is maintaining a wrong livelihood. Due to maintaining a wrong livelihood, body and mind do not become pure. Sensual desire and unwholesome states are not abandoned. Therefore, this bhikkhu practices in vain without results, cannot enter the 4 holy jhanas, and cannot realize the threefold knowledge. Therefore, the Buddha taught, monks must have few desires and contentment, to live as heirs to the Dhamma, not as heirs to food. If monks do not have few desires and contentment, if they do not live as heirs to the Dhamma, but constantly live as heirs to material goods and food, the mind gives rise to sensual desire, craving, and heedlessness, chasing after the 5 sensual pleasures, eating at improper times, sleeping at improper times. The intellect becomes dull, imaginal wisdom develops, constantly debating east and west to cover up faults, completely destroying the code of precepts, living a life of sensual pleasure without fearing minor faults, without feeling shame when lacking dignified demeanor and refined conduct, walking, standing, looking, and gazing just like worldly people. Right action refers to the lessons on how the actions of the body, speech, and mind must be righteous. Here, it means training these 3 areas so as to not commit evil actions. Right livelihood refers to the lessons on the right sustenance of the body. Right sustenance of the body here means training oneself to avoid snacking and eating at improper times, eating at the right time, eating with moderation, eating not out of craving, eating for the sake of surviving to practice, not for material gain, not eating the meat of living beings, and not consuming toxic substances that cause illness and suffering to the body. No matter how delicious, sweet, or rich those foods may be, staying away from them is necessary. That is sustaining the body rightly. A rightly sustained life has these benefits. 1. The body does not pay the karmic debt of suffering. 2. The body suffers no illness and pain. 3. The lifespan is prolonged. 4. The body is healthy, making practice easier. 5. The body becomes healthy and the mind becomes peaceful, serene, and untroubled. A person who practices Buddhism must diligently cultivate the lessons of right action and right livelihood, because this is the humanistic ethics of cause and effect embedded in the life of every human being who practices the Buddha's path. We are disciples of the Buddha. Disregarding right action and right livelihood is not possible, because only when right action is good will right livelihood follow suit. Only when right action is pure will right livelihood be pure, and as a result, life will be peaceful and happy. Conversely, if right action is bad, right livelihood must endure many disasters and sufferings, and so on. A bhikkhu disciple of the Buddha must also pay attention to right action and right livelihood. If right action does not accord with the holy life, if he commits minor faults without shame, the practice of right livelihood goes nowhere. The mind's outflows cannot be eradicated. Meditation falls into wrong meditation and wrong concentration. Practicing for a lifetime yields no benefit, and time is lost uselessly. Therefore, whether a lay follower or a bhikkhu, anyone wishing for liberation, peace, and happiness in this very life must carry their practice through to the end. First, training in right action and cultivating every bodily, verbal, and mental act to be completely wholesome, meaning not causing suffering to oneself or to others, is required. By doing so, sustaining the body through right livelihood ensures that countless people practicing the Buddha's path will all achieve the exact same result of liberation. If everyone knew how to live rightly in right action and sustain the body through right livelihood, then this world would be heaven and the ultimate bliss. There is no need to look anywhere else, nor is there any need to recite the Buddha's name to seek rebirth in the Western Pure Land. Is that not so?